Greetings to the faculty and students of Goa University. So today the main topic will be on self-compassion. And before we begin on this subject, let us try to understand what compassion really is. So compassion is a mental factor defined as a genuine sense of concern for others, which arises from perceiving the suffering of others. And as we all know that we human beings are compassionate by nature. And as a matter of fact, we love ourselves the most, and that is a fact. And self-compassion is being understanding to yourself, being kind to yourself, and being able to accept the flaws and the imperfections you have on a very humane level. And this concept is actually very much relevant and very beneficial to the current modern society. As we all know that in these very turbulent period, the concept of the competitive nature is very much being obsessed by all of us. And this is the very main reason being that right from childhood up till adulthood and old age, we have been constrained in this bubble. And the reason to that is because the very education system that we have been taught since childhood is based on this mechanism of being competitive. And due to this, many problems seems to arise. Mainly when we are unable to fulfill our achievements, we tend to get stressed and depressed. And due to this, we lose the trust in ourselves, and we compare what we have based on what others have. And this opens the door to a variety of problems. And when we are unable to keep up with what society wants us to do, then we tend to lose the sense of self-worthiness or self-worth. And that can be a major problem, because ultimately when you cannot love yourself, when you cannot trust yourself enough, then eventually your mind goes into stress. Because when you are not having self-sufficient love on yourself, then researchers have shown that the cortisol levels in your brain rises. And that is a major or a primary stress hormone which is inbuilt in our brain. And by releasing this excessive cortisol in our brains, we will be experiencing much stress, and that eventually leads us to depression and even at times suicidal behavior and suicidal thoughts. And the remedy to that is self-love and self-compassion, because researchers have shown that when we love ourselves, when we think of our own well-being, the levels of oxytocin and opioids naturally arises, and that leads us to gain this sensation of well-being and the feel-good hormones, which can be beneficial for our overall health and ultimately our immune system. And the other thing to note is we have to keep in mind that there is a major difference between self-love and self-centeredness. The latter being that self-centeredness is all about comparing yourself to others on a level which is based on superiority and inferiority, and can lead to selfishness, and which can have a major other problems like isolation from others and distrust to others, and can generate a lot of unhappiness in your lives. So, as we talked about before, human beings are in fact compassionate by nature. But the catch is that the compassion we have right now, biologically, which we have, does not actually validate as altruistic compassion or an altruistic attitude. The reason to that is we are naturally biased, and our compassion too is biased. We have this attitude towards friends that we are attached to the enemies or the people who harm us. We generate hostility, and to the people who fall in the neither of being a friend or an enemy, we have this neutral attitude. And due to this, our compassion is very much biased. And to remedy that, and to be able to generate great compassion as it is known, we have to be able to cultivate impartiality, which is very, very, very important. And to be able to cultivate that, we need to have an even mind. We need to have an even mind to our friends, to our enemies or the people who harm us, and to the neutral people. And to do so, it is important for us to have this unbiased view for the three groups of types of people. The way to do that is to think of the equalness or the evenness from the side of the three types of people out there. Because as we all know that every living beings or all sentient beings have the same nature and same quality, that they all want happiness, and at the same time they want to dispel suffering equally. There is no distinction between that. So thinking of that, generally we will come up with the assumption that, or the conclusion that everyone in fact is the deserved recipients of happiness and deserved recipients of alleviation of suffering. So keeping that in mind, we need to think of the neutral people at the first, and then have that attitude, be able to generate that attitude at first. And following that, we need to concentrate on the people who we love or our friends, and to think of them at the same level as we have on the neutral types of people. Because naturally we are attached to our friends. So to be able to get that unbiased view, we first need to get rid of that attachment. And the way to do that is we need to think that the love or the attachment we have is so very much uncertain and fragile, because a few harsh words may even change this attitude that we have towards our friends. And this love could immediately turn into hate, hence the uncertainty of this attitude. So if we think in this way, then we will be able to get rid of this very firm and rigid apprehension that we have to them as being attached. Similarly, when we think on our enemies, the hate we have towards them or the anger we have can change very quickly, as explained by the great Indian saint Shantideva in engaging in bodhisattva deeds. The enemy that we once feared, even hearing his name, reconciled and became such good friends that we cannot even bear to think of being separated from them even for a moment. So this is how uncertain and fragile the line or the reference between being friends and enemies is. So the impermanent nature of this shows us that our attitude is in fact so much impermanent too. So that hence we must think of this with an even mind. So if we are able to generate or cultivate this impartiality, as the great Indian master Kamalashila in his second stages of meditation states that being able to cultivate impartiality is like a very good field, a very fertile good field, in which if we moisten it with love of seeing all living beings with affection and cultivating the healthy seed or planting the healthy seed of compassion, then very quickly we will be able to generate great compassion. So, quoting this, I would like to say that if we want to generate great compassion, then generating impartiality is a must. So, and the great Indian saint Shantideva, in engaging in the deeds of bodhisattva, stated that all the suffering we have right now originates from being self-centered, and all the happiness we have right now originates from cherishing others. So that is in fact the case, and we have been doing it the wrong way all up till now. And to be able to be happy, we need to cultivate this attitude of cherishing others, and the perfect way to do that is to practice the secret method of exchanging self with others, as taught by the great Saint Shantideva. And to do that, actually, there are two obstacles when it comes to changing self with others. And the concept of changing self with others is not about changing or being as the self being others or the others transforming into self. That is not what it is about. But in fact, it is about changing this attitude that we have at the current moment, that we cherish ourselves the most and we tend to neglect others. So the changing or the reversal of this attitude of being able to cherish others as we cherish ourselves, and the attitude that we transforming the attitude that we neglect others into yourself, into your own. So this is the method. And it may seem impossible actually for some people, and I do not blame it, and it is completely natural to think in this way, because they may be very skeptical in thinking, how can I cherish others as I do myself? But in fact, attitudes are merely out of habitual nature. Just like the body we have right now, that we cherish so much and we tend to apprehend so much as ours, very deeply and very rigidly, is in fact comes from other, as our parents is others. This is a part of your parents and a byproduct of your parents. Even so, out of your conditioning and out of the habitual nature that you tend to have, you possess it and you tend to claim it as yours. So similarly, if we are able to change this attitude, then definitely we will be able to cherish others as much as we cherish ourselves. And also, it is important to note that when we try to cultivate this exchanging self and others, we will be facing with two obstacles. And the two obstacles are that we make this categorical differentiation between the self and others as being essentially different, just as the colors of blue and yellow. So the remedy to that is to think that the self and other are very much dependent on each other. And because when you are aware of the self, it depends on the reference point of others as to being aware of the self, and vice versa. So the self and other are mutually dependent on each other, and there is nothing whatsoever from their own side as being essentially different or a very distinct essence from them. So this is the way. And the other obstacle that we will face is thinking that since the suffering of others doesn't harm us, it is of no concern to myself, because it ultimately doesn't harm us. And the great saint Shantideva points out this debate that then there would be no point in accumulating wealth in your youth for the fear of suffering in your old age, because ultimately the suffering of your old age doesn't harm you in your youth. Likewise, there would be no point in using your hand to remove the suffering of your foot, because the foot and the hand are essentially others. So, to deal with these qualms, the answer or the remedy of way of logical thinking, because in fact, the practice of compassion is a part of analytical meditation. It is not based on concentration meditation. It is in fact a part of analytical meditation. And this involves investigating and using logical reasons into effect. So the remedy to that is, there is the calm again. There is again the debate that comes, the issue that, well, youth and old age are in fact one continuum, and the foot and the leg, the foot and the hand is actually one collection of one collection, parts of one collection, entities of one collection. So that is one qualm or one doubt that people may get. And the answer to that, or the logical reasoning to that, is to use this logic that, well, the concept of continuum and the concept of collection are in fact very much just posited through a series of moments and series of entities coming together. So there is in fact no self-sufficient or self-inherent essence from them. Likewise, the self and the other too are very much posited or defined from a reference point and are defined from a series of moments and collection and continuum. So thinking that there is no essential, because the self and ourself of ours and the self and others too are defined through a series of continuum and the series of collections. So there is no evident reference point which is self-sufficient and is in fact just defined or posited merely through them. So this is the way of dealing with these negative or these very firm apprehensions that we have, which serves as an obstacle to cultivate great compassion. So now let us go into how we can actually establish and implement the meditation on compassion itself. And before we begin, we can implement the previous posture that we have talked about before in our previous session, or the sevenfold posture. And utilizing that, it would be very much viable if you can do the 9-round breathing practices before starting on this compassion practice, because that will settle down your mind and make it easier for you to concentrate and analyze. So the best way to start with the meditation on compassion is by meditating on impartiality. Because as we know, of course, we can always meditate directly on love and compassion, but it is very important, as stated by Kamala Shila in his the second stage of meditation, that you need to first have a solid, good, fertile field in order to plant and grow. So impartiality is just like that. And we need to first have this field in order to build our practice. So talking about meditating on impartiality, first it would be best to think of a neutral person who has neither benefited you nor harmed you, and you have this even-minded attitude. And the goal actually is to be able to generate this even-mindedness that you have towards the neutral types of people into the people who you are biased to, biased through attachment or hostility. So first try to concentrate on this neutral person and think that from this person's side, he is very much equal to all other living beings, as he too wants happiness and wants to dispel suffering equally. And thinking of him as from a very, when you take away the layers of that you have set or you have posited, then you will be left with the person who just wants happiness and wants to dispel suffering. So thinking on that level, try to be familiar with this even mind that you have towards this person. Moving further on, concentrate on your loved ones, on a person who you love very much. And think of that person again on a very basic, humane level. And the love you have towards him as very fragile and very uncertain, because that may change in an instant. So concentrating and meditating on that using these valid logical reasonings, the attachment you have will lose its very strength or strong apprehension, thus making you have an even mind towards this person. When you have achieve that, then you can move on to the person who has harmed you or who you consider an enemy. On that person, the biased nature of your mind or the attitude is that you are hostile towards that person because that person has harmed you physically or emotionally. So the method is, again, to think of that person from a very basic humane level, taking off the layers that you have put on that person as being your enemy or other very gross level classifications or categorizations. So once you go deeper into that, then you will find that that person too is suffering as much as you out of ignorance and is in fact very much deserving of happiness and elevation of suffering. And also the hate or the anger you have towards him is very much impermanent and fragile because a few good words may even make him your best friend, whom you cannot bear to even separate for an instant. So once you have generated that even-mindedness attitude towards these three types of person, the neutral, your friends, and your enemies, then you can try to generate this attitude towards all living beings in the whole wider sense. And if you are able to do that, if you are able to generate this even-mindedness, then naturally when you try to cultivate compassion, the compassion too will be very much unbiased, hence altruistic in the real sense. And I hope that this practice will assist you in generating great compassion, and in the journey will help you lead much happier and content lives and be able to be resilient to the ongoing stress and worries that you face during your daily lives. Over the past couple of weeks, we have learned different types of meditation and different practices. And the practices that we have learned can be practiced by anyone, in fact. And it is not actually something that needs to be done in a row, but in fact, it is something that can be practiced depending on your own mindset and your own situation. So the practice of concentration actually requires you to have some time and space which you can contribute to that, because as we know that you cannot practice the practice of compassion, the practice of concentration during traffic and in places where there are loud noises. But in fact, you need a separate place for that. It would be feasible for that. But as the practice of compassion is a practice where you can practice anywhere or any time. So depending on your situation and circumstances, and especially if you are dealing with anger, then the practice of love and the practice of self-compassion also comes very important. So it is a type of practice which is very elusive and can be done by anybody based on their own circumstances and their own dispositions. So that is my advice to all of you. Thank you very much.
Salam